It was a bright and sunny afternoon. The streets were busy, filled with people rushing to work, cars honking, and vendors calling out to sell their goods. The atmosphere was ordinary, nothing seemed out of the usual. But in the middle of this mundane scene, something shocking was about to happen. Officer Daniels, a local police officer, strutted down the sidewalk with an air of authority. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming in the sunlight, and his expression carried a mix of arrogance and superiority. He had grown used to people following his orders, and in his mind, that gave him the right to belittle anyone who didn't impress him. Steven Seagal appeared quietly, walking down the same street. He wore simple jeans, a dark jacket, and sunglasses. He didn't have a bodyguard, no flashy car, no entourage. Just a calm presence that somehow seemed to make the chaotic street feel quieter. He was unassuming, but those who knew him would recognize the aura of someone who commanded respect without demanding it. As Steven passed the corner, Officer Daniels noticed him. Instead of ignoring the man, Daniels decided to make a scene. He stepped in front of Steven and blocked his path. With a mocking grin, he shoved him lightly and laughed loudly, drawing the attention of nearby pedestrians. "Move along, old man," the officer sneered. "This street isn't for your kind. Go back where you belong." His voice was loud enough to echo across the sidewalk, and some onlookers stopped to watch. People whispered and shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene or just stay back. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or react angrily. He looked at the officer calmly, almost smiling. His silence was louder than any words Daniels could shout. The officer, sensing the growing attention from the crowd, felt a flicker of unease but tried to cover it up with arrogance. The crowd's murmurs grew. Phones were raised, recording the incident. The ordinary day had suddenly become extraordinary. The police officer's arrogance had turned a busy street into a stage, and everyone around was about to witness a moment they would never forget. And then, in the calmest way possible, Steven Seagal's reaction began to change the entire scene. It wasn't fast or aggressive. It wasn't loud or threatening. But what happened next would stun everyone watching and teach a lesson that no one on that street would ever forget. The sun shone brightly over the city streets, casting long shadows across the sidewalks and illuminating the small details of everyday life. People bustled along, some hurrying to appointments, others strolling casually, coffee cups in hand, phones pressed to their ears. Car horns blared intermittently as drivers navigated the congestion. Street vendors called out in rhythmic chants, offering everything from fresh fruit to trinkets, adding a constant background noise to the urban symphony. The city was alive, vibrant, and utterly ordinary. Yet in the midst of this normal day, tension quietly began to build, almost imperceptible, until it would explode in a moment no one could forget. Officer Daniels moved through the crowd with unmistakable arrogance. His polished boots clicked against the pavement as he walked, his uniform perfectly pressed, his badge catching the sunlight with every turn. Every gesture he made, from the way he flicked his collar to the way he scanned the crowd, radiated confidence, and a hint of condescension. Daniels believed that his authority gave him the right to humiliate anyone who dared to appear insignificant or out of place. To him, power wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about dominating the environment, asserting control over people, and ensuring everyone knew their place. As he strode down the street, he noticed a figure ahead, a man walking slowly and calmly, taking in the sights around him without urgency. Steven Seagal, dressed simply in worn jeans and a dark jacket, moved with quiet confidence. He wasn't flashy, he didn't carry an entourage, and he didn't announce his presence. Yet there was an undeniable aura about him, a subtle command of attention that didn't need words. People in passing glanced briefly at him and then looked away, unsure why his calm presence felt so different amid the noise of the busy street. Steven paused near a coffee cart, the aroma of brewing coffee drifting through the air. He smiled politely at the vendor, exchanging a few quiet words before reaching for his wallet. The simplicity of his actions contrasted sharply with the swagger and forced dominance of Officer Daniels. The officer noticed him, and instead of ignoring the man, his pride and ego compelled him to act. He stepped in front of Steven, blocking his path with exaggerated authority. "Move along, old man," Daniels sneered, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of the crowd. "This street isn't for your type. Go back where you belong." The words were sharp, dripping with mockery and self-importance. Pedestrians nearby slowed their pace, some watching curiously, others instinctively moving a step back. Phones began to appear in hands, subtly capturing the confrontation. The officer's display was calculated. He believed everyone would instinctively side with him, the uniformed figure wielding visible authority. Steven looked up calmly, meeting Daniel's gaze without any trace of anger or fear. "Just enjoying the day, officer," he replied softly, each word deliberate and measured. There was no challenge in his tone, no sharp retort. It was a simple, unassuming statement, but one that carried weight. The contrast between his calm composure and Daniel's aggressive posturing was palpable. For a moment, the bustling street seemed to quiet down around them. People shifted uneasily, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Daniels laughed, a short, dismissive sound. He stepped closer, attempting to intimidate Steven further. "You think you can just walk here without respect?" he snapped. "You're in my street now, and I decide who belongs and who doesn't." Yet, despite his efforts, Steven didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't argue. He simply smiled faintly, an almost imperceptible expression that seemed to unsettle the officer more than any words could. The crowd began murmuring, curious and confused. Some whispered to each other, trying to recognize Steven's face, while others stayed back, uncertain whether to intervene or simply watch. The energy on the street shifted subtly, the tension became electric. Daniels, sensing eyes on him, tried to regain control of the moment, unaware that he was the one being observed more than the man he intended to humiliate. "Before we continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone stay calm under disrespect? Think about it. True strength often shows when someone doesn't react to insults, when they maintain control without aggression. Would you have been able to do the same if the roles were reversed?" Steven adjusted his jacket slightly, still smiling politely, still calm. The ordinary street had become a stage, and the next few moments would test not only the officer's arrogance but also the perception of everyone around. Little did they know that what seemed like a simple act of humiliation would soon turn into a lesson in respect, humility, and silent authority, one that no one present would ever forget. The sun was still high, casting sharp shadows across the sidewalk, but the warmth of the day did nothing to ease the tension that had suddenly gripped the busy street. Pedestrians paused mid-step, coffee cups in hand, as a scene unfolded that no one could ignore. Officer Daniels, feeling both emboldened and impatient, decided to escalate. He stepped closer to Steven Seagal, chest puffed out, eyes narrowing. Without warning, he pushed Steven lightly with his hand, the gesture intended to assert dominance, to humiliate publicly. "See? You're weak. Old. Out of place," Daniels sneered. His words were sharp, deliberate, and loud enough for everyone around to hear. The officer chuckled, a short, self-satisfied laugh, as if this simple act of mockery had already proven his superiority. Bystanders gasped, some whispering to their companions. Phones appeared almost instinctively, capturing the confrontation. A young man leaned against a lamppost, recording silently, his face a mix of curiosity and unease. A woman with a stroller edged closer, whispering to her child that they should watch. Even a delivery man paused mid-pedal, balancing on his bicycle, eyes fixed on the scene. The ordinary street, so filled with mundane routines just moments ago, had become a stage, and every passerby had become an audience. But Steven Seagal did not react immediately. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue or push back. He simply stared at Officer Daniels with calm, unshakable eyes. There was no anger, no fear, only a quiet intensity that seemed to ripple outwards. That single stare, steady and composed, carried a weight far heavier than any physical shove or shouted insult. People felt it instinctively, a subtle shift in energy that made them lean closer to watch. Daniels, misreading the silence as fear or submission, grew bolder. He stepped even closer, gesturing with his hands, pacing like a predator. "You think you can just walk here without respect?" he shouted. "Do you understand who you're talking to? I decide who belongs and who doesn't." His voice cracked slightly, betraying a hint of nervousness he tried to mask with aggression. He laughed again, louder this time, attempting to draw the crowd into his confidence. Some people murmured in agreement, unsure whether to side with him or just keep their distance. Then something shifted. Steven Seagal moved forward, slowly, deliberately, each step measured and calm. There was no rush, no force, no anger. Yet in that quiet approach, every eye in the crowd turned to him. His presence suddenly filled the street. The hum of conversations dimmed, car engines seemed quieter, and even the honking of impatient drivers faded into the background. It wasn't loud or explosive, but it was undeniable. Commanding attention without shouting, that was the power Steven carried. "Sometimes arrogance makes people forget who they face," Steven said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. But the words cut through the noise like a sharp blade. The crowd instinctively drew back, a few instinctively nodding in agreement, sensing the truth in his calm warning. Even Officer Daniels froze mid-step, his confidence faltering under the weight of that quiet authority. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time that afternoon, the street was silent. Pedestrians who had initially laughed at Daniels now exchanged nervous glances. Phones continued recording, capturing every moment, every shift in energy. Witnesses felt a strange mix of awe and fear, unsure how someone so calm could hold such command over a situation that had begun with mockery. The officer, once certain of his dominance, now felt the first twinges of doubt. His ego, which had seemed unshakable, wavered as he realized that the man before him was far from ordinary. Steven remained composed, smiling faintly, neither aggressive nor confrontational. It was a smile that carried subtle authority, a warning wrapped in tranquility. The crowd felt it in their bones. The officer's arrogance, which had seemed so natural just minutes before, now looked foolish, weak, almost childlike. And the street, ordinary only moments ago, had become a silent arena where respect, power, and composure were being measured in real time. In that moment, everyone watching understood something essential. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, measured, and unwavering. And arrogance, no matter how bold, can crumble instantly when faced with calm, unshakable confidence. The tension on the street had reached a point where every ordinary sound seemed amplified. Car horns, footsteps, distant voices, all faded into the background as Steven Seagal's calm presence seemed to dominate the space. Pedestrians who had been hurrying along their routines stopped mid-step. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips, delivery bikes coasted to a halt, and even the street vendors momentarily forgot to call out their prices. It was as if the city itself had noticed that something extraordinary was unfolding on that sunny afternoon. People froze, instinctively taking a step back, giving Steven a wide berth. His quiet composure was magnetic, a stark contrast to Officer Daniels' loud and aggressive demeanor. Where Daniels barked orders and tried to assert dominance, Steven radiated control effortlessly, without raising his voice, without moving aggressively. It was a presence that demanded attention and respect simply by existing. Several bystanders quickly pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. Some whispered to each other nervously, unsure if they should intervene, capture the moment, or simply watch. A man in a suit muttered to his colleague, "Is he really?" while a group of teenagers leaned against a wall, mouth slightly agape, eyes wide with disbelief. Every camera lens and eye seemed to converge on Steven, as if the street itself had become a theater and he was the lead actor in a scene no one could predict. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels, sensing the growing attention, tried to laugh it off. He laughed nervously, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. His gaze darted between the crowd and Steven, looking for signs that his authority was still unquestioned. "Huh. See, everyone knows I'm in charge here," he barked, attempting to mask the flicker of fear creeping into his posture. But the confidence he had exuded earlier was faltering. The more he tried to assert control, the more obvious it became that he was losing it. Then, a voice from the crowd broke through the tension. A passerby, an older man carrying a briefcase, squinted at Steven and muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "Wait, isn't that Steven Seagal?" His words were cautious, uncertain, yet they carried a spark of recognition. Whispers spread instantly through the small crowd, like a ripple in water. "That's him," someone gasped. "It's really Steven Seagal." Others craned their necks, trying to get a better look. Phones were raised higher, cameras zooming in to catch every detail. The once ordinary street had transformed into a stage of disbelief, curiosity, and excitement. People exchanged glances, their murmurs growing louder, filled with awe and incredulity. Even Officer Daniels noticed the shift immediately. The whispers, the sudden recognition, the way heads turned and cameras focused, it all sank in like a cold wave. His face paled slightly, and for the first time, he hesitated. The arrogance that had carried him through years of small victories evaporated under the weight of this new revelation. The crowd, which he had assumed was silently supporting him, now seemed unsure, uncertain, and perhaps even intimidated by the quiet force standing before him. Steven's calm expression didn't change. He didn't smirk, didn't boast, didn't react to the recognition. He simply observed, a faint smile playing on his lips, as though he already knew the effect he had on the street and the officer alike. The crowd sensed it instantly, the difference between someone who commands respect through fear and someone who commands it effortlessly through presence. The murmurs continued, building momentum, each whisper feeding the next. The atmosphere shifted completely. What had started as an ordinary confrontation escalated into a moment of collective realization. Every passerby who had initially dismissed Steven as just another man on the street now felt the subtle but undeniable power of calm authority. For a fleeting moment, even the sunlit street seemed quieter, the city's usual chaos replaced with a sense of anticipation. People instinctively leaned forward, waiting to see what would happen next. No one spoke above a whisper, yet the energy crackling in the air was palpable, a mix of suspense, awe, and the thrill of witnessing a moment that was about to become unforgettable. The stage was set. All eyes were on Steven Seagal, and every witness sensed that the next few seconds could completely change the dynamic of the street, the officer, and the entire crowd. The tense silence that had settled over the busy street was suddenly broken by the low rumble of an engine. People instinctively turned their heads as a sleek black SUV approached, its polished surface reflecting the sunlight and the faces of the crowd. The vehicle stopped abruptly near the scene, tires screeching slightly against the asphalt. The doors opened, and a wave of purposeful movement poured out, shattering the uneasy calm. Several men in tailored suits and discreet security personnel stepped out. Their movements were swift and coordinated, professional in a way that suggested training, authority, and urgency. Each carried folders, documents, and electronic devices, and all eyes immediately locked on Steven Seagal. The crowd instinctively parted, sensing that these newcomers were not ordinary assistants or bystanders. They were part of something far larger than the street confrontation had suggested. One of the men stepped forward and addressed Steven with unmistakable respect. "Mr. Seagal, we've been waiting for you, sir." His voice was firm but deferential, a tone reserved for leaders and figures of immense authority. The calm, deliberate manner in which the team approached made it clear to everyone watching that Steven's presence was commanding more than attention. It demanded respect. Officer Daniels, who had been standing with his chest puffed out moments before, felt his confidence evaporate instantly. His face turned pale, and a cold sweat began to form along his brow. He looked around, searching for support from the crowd, but all he saw were whispers, astonished stares, and the unmistakable recognition of awe in the faces around him. The street that had once been his stage to dominate now felt like a courtroom where he had been accused, judged, and found wanting. Steven remained calm, as if the chaos surrounding him were nothing more than background noise. He stepped slightly forward, his gaze sweeping across the street, landing finally on Officer Daniels. The man who had tried to humiliate him only minutes ago was now frozen in disbelief, his voice caught somewhere between defiance and fear. "I came for a walk," Steven said softly, his tone measured, deliberate, yet carrying the weight of authority, "but now I'll be making changes here." His words, quiet yet cutting, made the entire crowd lean in. There was no anger, no aggression, only the calm assertion of power that immediately shifted the balance of the confrontation. The executives and security personnel quickly positioned themselves around Steven, forming a subtle protective circle, and began distributing documents. The crowd noticed the folders labeled with corporate insignias, contracts, and official stamps, proof that this was no ordinary street encounter. Steven's calm aura, combined with a sudden show of formal authority, left no doubt. He was now not only untouchable but the person in charge. Officer Daniels' attempts to recover his composure faltered completely. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words emerged. The laughter he had used to intimidate just minutes ago was gone, replaced by the stark realization that he had misjudged the man in front of him. The weight of public embarrassment pressed down, magnified by the recognition of Steven's newfound authority. The crowd murmured amongst themselves, astonishment spreading like wildfire. Pedestrians who had recorded the confrontation now whispered to each other, replaying the moment they had witnessed. Some exchanged glances, nodding subtly, as if acknowledging the lesson silently unfolding before them, Arrogance, no matter how bold, can be utterly defeated by calm power and genuine authority. What would you do if someone humiliated you publicly but turned out to be more powerful? Comment below. Stand up or stay calm. Take a moment to think about it. Would you confront them in anger, or would you wait, watch, and let composure guide your actions? Steven didn't shout. He didn't need to. The presence of his team, the evidence of authority they carried, and the quiet confidence in his demeanor spoke louder than any words ever could. The confrontation that had begun with mockery and aggression had now turned into a lesson in humility, for the officer, for the crowd, and for anyone who might later hear of the story. The sun continued to shine over the street, but the ordinary city sounds seemed muted against the weight of the moment. Cars slowly drove past, people continued on their errands, but everyone present would remember this afternoon, the day arrogance met calm authority, and the lesson that followed left a mark far deeper than any words could explain. The street remained tense for a few moments after the dramatic reveal. Officer Daniels stumbled back instinctively, his knees slightly buckling as the reality of the situation finally sank in. His face was pale, lips parted, and his usual bravado had vanished entirely. For the first time that afternoon, he felt the weight of public humiliation. The realization that the man he had tried to intimidate so arrogantly was not only untouchable but immensely powerful left him trembling. Steven Seagal didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesticulate or scold. He simply walked past the officer, each step deliberate, measured, and calm. His eyes scanned the crowd briefly, acknowledging the onlookers who had remained composed, who had not laughed, mocked, or joined in Daniel's attempt to belittle him. A subtle nod, almost imperceptible, was enough to signal his respect. "Remember this," Steven said quietly, addressing both the officer and the witnesses alike, his voice calm but carrying authority that reached every ear nearby. "Respect is earned by humility, not demanded by arrogance. And arrogance can blind the strongest of minds." The crowd, still holding their phones and watching intently, absorbed his words in stunned silence. People who had initially paused out of curiosity now felt a deep sense of awe. A young woman holding a coffee whispered to her friend, "I can't believe what I just saw." He didn't even raise his voice, and yet, everyone felt it. An older man, still clutching his briefcase, shook his head slowly, muttering, "That's real power, not the kind you wear on a badge or uniform." Officer Daniels, meanwhile, remained frozen. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Every instinct he had relied on as an authority figure failed him in that moment. The pride and arrogance that had fueled him all morning now felt like a heavy weight pressing down on him, and he realized that his attempts to dominate Steven had been utterly meaningless. Steven's team subtly repositioned themselves around him, not aggressively, but as a natural extension of his authority. The executives carried their documents with calm professionalism, a silent signal that this wasn't about confrontation anymore, it was about order, control, and presence. The contrast between Steven's composed power and Daniel's crumbling ego became a vivid lesson for everyone watching. As Steven walked further down the sunlit street, the murmurs of the crowd grew, blending with the distant city noises. Some people waved their phones to capture the moment one last time. Others simply stood, frozen, absorbing the lesson of humility and respect that had unfolded before them. Even street vendors and pedestrians who had no direct connection to the incident felt the impact, understanding on a subconscious level that what they had witnessed was far more than a mere street confrontation. It was a demonstration of true strength and presence. "Notice who you respect," Steven said softly, almost to himself, "and remember that respect is never owed, it is always earned." The words were quiet, but they carried like thunder in the minds of those who heard them. His calm, silent authority lingered in the air long after he passed, and even Officer Daniels felt the echo of it pressing into him, a reminder that arrogance had no place in genuine power. The crowd began to slowly disperse, whispering to one another, sharing the moment in hushed tones. Many replayed the scene in their minds, the silent steps of Steven Seagal down the street, the way the officer's confidence had crumbled, and the unspoken lesson of humility that had been broadcast to every witness. The ordinary afternoon had transformed into an extraordinary lesson, one that would be retold for years to come. By the time Steven disappeared around the corner, the street felt ordinary again. Cars resumed their honking, pedestrians moved at their regular pace, and vendors returned to their calls. But the impression he left, the quiet power, the calm authority, the lesson on respect, was louder than any words, etched into the memory of everyone present. The city, for just a brief moment, had witnessed a demonstration of humility, restraint, and the true meaning of strength. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long golden rays across the streets where the confrontation had unfolded. What had started as a typical busy afternoon had become a lesson in humility, respect, and true strength. The people who had witnessed Steven Seagal's calm response to public humiliation could feel the impact lingering, like an invisible force that shifted the energy around them. Respect, they realized, was not something reserved for those in positions of power or wealth. It was a quality that everyone deserved, regardless of their appearance, age, or status. The way Steven had carried himself, quietly, confidently, and without aggression, demonstrated that true power was not about intimidation or fear. It was about self-control, composure, and integrity, even when faced with disrespect and provocation. True strength, the crowd now understood, was calmness under pressure. It was easy to react with anger when insulted or mocked. It was easy to try to assert dominance through shouting or force. But the real test of character lay in how one responded when others sought to belittle, humiliate, or provoke. Steven had shown, without raising his voice or making a scene, that composure alone could command respect far more effectively than any act of aggression ever could. The officer, who had tried to humiliate him, had been undone not by physical force, but by quiet authority. The witnesses, too, learned an important lesson. It is far better to remain calm, to stand respectfully, and to observe with clarity than to join in arrogance or mockery. Their silence, their restraint, had earned them the acknowledgement of someone who commanded authority effortlessly. As people began walking away, whispering to each other and replaying the events in their minds, the moral of the story became clear. True character shows not in moments of comfort or admiration, but in moments of challenge, confrontation, and arrogance. It is easy to be respectful when someone is powerful or popular. The real measure is whether one can show respect when it seems unnecessary, when no one else is watching, and when pride and ego might tempt one to act otherwise. Steven's quiet exit had left an impression stronger than any loud speech ever could. His presence, his words, and his actions had turned a simple afternoon into a vivid lesson. The people who had watched, recorded, or simply stood nearby carried a memory that would stay with them for years. A reminder that humility is far more powerful than aggression, and that composure can command respect in ways that anger and force never will. Now, as the street slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, the lesson spread beyond the witnesses themselves. Those who would see the recordings online, hear the story retold by friends, or reflect on the events in their own lives could also feel the weight of the lesson. Respect everyone, not because of who they are, but because it is the right thing to do. True power is silent. True authority is measured in calmness, not chaos. And true character shines brightest in moments when others try to provoke, belittle, or humiliate you. Engagement line. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is real power. Share your own story of staying calm under provocation. And tell me where you are watching from. I want to thank every calm soul personally for believing in the strength of respect and composure. Remember, the world is full of moments that test our character. Some days, it may be a rude passerby, a harsh word, or someone trying to assert power over you unfairly. And in those moments, the choice is yours, to react with anger or to respond with calm strength. The greatest lesson from today's street encounter is that the quiet response, the composed demeanor, and the steady respect we show to others often leaves the deepest impact, far beyond what anyone expects. So, as you go about your day, take a moment to reflect. How can you show respect, humility, and calmness, even in challenging situations? Who in your life deserves acknowledgement for their quiet strength? The story of Steven Seagal on that sunny street is more than a confrontation. It is a reminder that respect and humility are timeless forms of power, visible to all, remembered by many, and felt far beyond the moments in which they occur.